I think I just,
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Fabulous.
okay, we're good then. All right, got it. Let's get this thing out of the way again. Come on, keep going. There you go. Stay down there. I swear, it's technology. There, out of the way.
Now go to slideshow so you can have full screen. There you go. All right, we're all set.
There. Okay, well, here we are.
Anyway,
And this is about my 2015 year-long bee
This is all-
survey
this
that I
takes up-
did out on.
No,
I don't hear him.
Who's
turn
ever
up the-
has their
turn
microphones
up the
on,
volume.
please mute yourself.
underneath of you.
Okay,
You might have to turn up the volume on this thing.
please
This
mute
one.
yourself.
Be
Okay.
careful, it's too loud, like.
Fred, you're still on there. Mute yourself, please. Okay, let's try it again. My 2015 year-long bee survey that I did out on Poplar Island, which is officially now the Paul S. Sarbanes Ecosystem Restoration Project at Poplar Island. And I wanted to show a little bit of the history of how the island has changed from the early days until where it is now. And I ended up finding so much interesting information about it that I've put in a lot about Poplar Island history. So bear with me and we'll get to the bees. But I just found this fascinating. So anyway, Poplar Island was probably discovered back in the late 1500s by the Spanish. And William Claiborne was the first one who surveyed it in 1627. Then he called it Popley's Island after Lieutenant William Popley. And then in 1631, he transferred it to his cousin, Richard Thompson. And Richard and his wife and child and their indentured servants moved to the island. They raised crops and livestock. But then in 1637, Thompson returns from a trading expedition, and his wife, children, and servants are all massacred. Livestock was all slaughtered. The house and the farm buildings burned to the ground. And this was reportedly by the local Nanticokes. And with that, Thompson abandoned the island and moved elsewhere. And then in the mid 1600s, various owners owned it. And somewhere in there, it became known as Poplar Island. So whether that was just Popley morphed into Poplar, that's one explanation. The other explanation is that there were a lot of tulip poplars on the island and the sawmill, and that they called it Poplar Island because of all the tulip poplars there. So there are earlier maps that I found, but they all show Poplar Island as a single lump, and I didn't know how accurate they were. This one probably is fairly accurate, this one from 1795. And as you can see, Poplar Island is one island, which does change. So Poplar Island during the War of 1812. In spring of 1813, the British fleet docked there and they occupied Poplar Island. And this was Admirals Warren and Coburn. And it offered a protected harbor for them. There was plenty of seafood for them to eat, as well as they just took whatever they wanted from the island owner at the time, William Sears, took all his crops and livestock. So then for 1813 to 14, the Navy was conducting their operations up the bay and around Baltimore, Fort McHenry, Battle of North Point, all that in the Baltimore area. And then by 1815, the British withdrew from the Eastern Shore and they were gone. Then the interesting thing, 1847, the Great Poplar Island Black Cat Farm. Now, in 1840, the islands, well, Charles Carroll, who signed the Declaration of Independence, is that it? Yes. he was, he passed it on to his grandson, who was also a Charles. And there was a large demand for black cat fur in China. So the grandson decides in December 1847, he's going to start a fur farm on the island. So he and his associate, they are offering 25 cents a piece for female black cats to be delivered to the island or to the office of his associate. And they imported hundreds of cats to Poplar Island. The goal was to have 1,000 females and a few males. And then they had a local waterman that they contracted with to deliver fish to the island every day to feed all the cats. And this all went well until a cold spell in the bay froze over. And then the waterman could not supply the fish to feed the cats. The hungry cats then decided, well, we're not staying here. So they headed across the ice to the mainland, and then they dispersed all throughout Tillman Island and that part of Talbot County. So a little bit about the more about the early history. In the mid 1800s, Poplar Island was getting a lot of erosion, and it became 3 separate islands: Poplar, Cobbler's Neck to the north, and I'll show you maps of these, and Coach's Neck to the south. Altogether, they were known as either Poplar Island or the Poplar Islands. And there was about 70 to 100 people living there. There were several small communities, one Valiant, that had post office, a school, sawmill, general store. And then the islanders subsisted on what they grew, and then also fishing, crabbing, and oystering. So this map, you'll notice the writing's upside down. For some reason, they had north pointing downward. So I had to flip it around so that it's sitting the way it should sit. And let me see if I can bring in my pointer here. And highlighter. No, that's not what I want. Let's try again. I want laser pointer. There you go. Okay, so this is Poplar throughout here. This is Coach's Neck. It was still connected at that point in, what is this, 1846 to 47. And this was Cobbler's Neck, which was a separate island at that point. And then in 1858, it looked pretty much the same. And some of these maps are really in bad shape, but this is what they had. This is from Library of Congress, this one. And this had some of the owners on it: Howarth, which was a big name in that area, Sherwood, and as some of you would know, there is Sherwood, an area called Sherwood down in Talbot County. And then this one's 1875. This one's probably an exaggeration of this neck here where Coach is connected. And you'll see the next one, 1892. The neck is much smaller here, connecting Poplar and Coach's. And another one, 1898. And you'll notice in some of these, and probably in the next one, well, the next one after this, early 1900s, most of the population had left and moved to the mainland. The school closed in 1918, and then the last residents moved in 1920s. But the islands were still privately owned at that point, but eroding fast. This one's a small map, 1900, and we'll just jump to the next one. Here we are, 1904. Still calling this Cobbler's Neck down here. I'm sorry, Cobbler's Neck up here and Coach's Neck down here. And this Poplar Island Harbor was also known as the Pot. And you can see some of the structures that were here, different homes and barns and things like that. 1904. Now I'll mention this here, but we'll see more about it later. You'll notice that Cobbler's Neck is called Jefferson Island. And the only reason it's called that on this map is because it was reprinted in 1938. But we'll get to how it became Jefferson Island. So at this point, Coach's Island is completely separate down here. I'm trying to, there we go. Separated from what was left of Poplar. And then Charles Harrison did this in 1970. He did a map of what Poplar was like in 1914. And you'll notice some of the structures here. There's a sawmill here, barns and a farm, schoolhouse, another farm with barns here, a graveyard, tobacco barn, another barn, homes in here. And then on Coach's Island, or Coach's Neck as it was still called then, there's another farm here. And then over here on Cobbler's Neck, there's post office and general store. And this was the area known as Valiant on this island. So then enter bootlegging. In the 1920s, the islands were privately owned. They were only used primarily during the wintertime for waterfowl hunting. And so nobody was there the rest of the year. So bootleggers decided to set up operations there. And there was a big raid on May 19th of 1929 with the county sheriff, Faulkner, and three untouchables, I guess, the three federal prohibition agents. And they raided, they're calling it Valiant's Island, but that is Cobbler's Neck. And you'll see this, these names get used kind of interchangeably a lot over the years. But you can see all the stills, the one big 1,000-gallon still, and then some of the smaller 500-gallon ones, and an immense amount of mash, 121,500 gallons of mash. Lots of glass jars, sugar, rye flour, vats of mash, and then a big 40 horsepower boiler. So when they arrested these four bootleggers, they knew that there was another boat that would be arriving. So they hid and waited for the boat, and then they arrested a 5-man crew. And they had been shipping liquor to Annapolis. They were just getting back from Annapolis, and they had shipped more there the night before. But everything they were shipping to the mainland then, of course, got distributed throughout the state. So this was one of the largest operations that was ever raided in Maryland. They were producing 1,500 gallons a day and making $5,000 a day, and this is in 1929. So quite a bit of money. And one of the guys that was caught said that if they had come a few days later, the operation was going to have expanded, and there would have been 50 employees that could have been arrested at the time. So it turned out some of these were just local moonshiners, but there was also the mob involved with this. And eventually some of the mobsters were caught, they were deported, and that was bootlegging. So the Jefferson Islands Club. So in 1929, these Washington Democrats were looking for a place for privacy and solitude. They wanted to go find a place where they could just go and rest. So they purchased 2 of the 3 islands, Poplar Island and Cobbler's Neck, and Coach's remained with his present owner. A lodge was constructed, and in 31, it became the Jefferson Islands Club, exclusive, males only, and it was founded by these 3 senators that you see here as an island escape. And one was from Missouri, one was from Nevada, and the other one was from Arkansas, and just a place to relax on the Chesapeake Bay. And this is what it looked like. The clubhouse. Oh, hey, why did that go? Come back here. Come back. Where's my pointer? I guess I don't have the pointer anymore. All right, time out. Let me grab my pointer again. Laser pointer. There we go. Okay. Now, there we go. Okay. This is a southeast view of the clubhouse, the northeast view of a clubhouse, and they had lots of rooms here. I think they could sleep 18 in the rooms, or 18 rooms that they could sleep in. And then this is one of the rooms, the presidential study. And here you see Postmaster General Farley and FDR down here. So with FDR, he was elected president in 32, but he was a founding member of the club. And he found this to be a great getaway during wartime for him and his vice president, the cabinet, and other leaders and industrialists. So they called this, allegedly, they called this the original Camp David, where the presidents would go to Jefferson Island. And seclusion, solitude, a place just to enjoy privacy away from the White House. So then the name, Jefferson Island. Governor Ritchie Highway, Maryland Governor Ritchie, he proposed an act in the legislature that changed the club's two Poplar Islands to the name the Jefferson Islands. And the name Jefferson Island stuck with the one that was Cobbler's Neck. The other one, Poplar Island, kind of has stayed as Poplar Island. But that's how it got the name Jefferson from Governor Ritchie. Members came, again, they could relax, hunt, fish, and they had 15 great years there on the Chesapeake Bay, known as the playground of the presidents. And here, this photo, you can see Truman, President Truman. He enjoyed playing poker, and he used to have these two horse pistols that supposedly belonged to Jesse James, and he would threaten the players jokingly while playing poker. So 1942, this is how things looked. Do I still have my pointer? Yeah, you can see quite a gap here between Coaches and Poplar. And here was Jefferson, and that's where the clubhouse was built. Right here, you can see these buildings here. And Poplar Island has gotten very skinny. So what happened to the Jefferson's Club? Well, in March 5th of 46, the fire destroyed the entire clubhouse. It burned to the ground, except for the chimney, the front porch, and FDR's wheelchair ramp that was concrete. And then they moved to their present location, which is on St. Catherine's Island in the lower Potomac River at the confluence with Wicomico Bay. And this is what it looks like on St. Catherine's Island. So at first, when I read about this, I said, well, this has to be a misprint. Wicomico River is on the eastern shore. So I looked it up, and actually Maryland has two Wicomico rivers, and one's on the western shore and one's on the eastern shore. And this is a very teeny one, this one on the western shore down, and it flows into the Potomac River. This is what the lodge looked like. Well, let me rephrase that. After the place burned down, then George K. Bailey and his wife Marion purchased Poplar Island and Jefferson Island, and they decided to build a hunting and fishing lodge on it. So in 1949, it became the Poplar Islands Lodge on the ruins of the old Jefferson Island Club. And this was a shot of it from the exterior. And here you can see the sign right on the dock, and in the background, there's the lodge. Here's a closer up view of the lodge and one of the rooms, the main lodge, the main lounge of the lodge. So at that point, the islands continued to erode at that point, and skipjack fleets were using the pot, that harbor, because it was a protected harbor for their fleet. But eventually, when George Bailey died in 1951, owners returned to the mainland and sold the island, both islands, Poplar Island and Jefferson Island. And the islands, from then on, they passed through several owners over the decades, mostly remained uninhabited. Bay waters continue to wash the islands away. And this is another drawing that Charles Harrison did of what the island had changed to in 1969. And you can see Poplar Island at this point had become 4 small islands. And Cobbler's Neck is still here and now known as Jefferson Island. And Coach's Neck was down here and had lost part of it right here. So looking at this, and I'll mention something, this and the next slide, notice here, again, Poplar is these 4 islands, what's left of the original Poplar Island. And going to the next slide, you can see by 1986, there was very little left of Poplar Island. So why were Jefferson Island and Coach's Island not affected as much? Because Poplar Island got all the wave action and wind action. So Poplar Island eroded away, but it protected Jefferson Island and Coach's Island. And this is a comparison, the footprint from 1847, which of course goes all the way around like this. And then just the little bits and pieces that were left in 1993. Poplar Island, with these 4 little parts, was down to 4 acres from an original 1,140 acres. So there wasn't much left. You'll notice Jefferson Island is almost split here, and we will see it split in future slides. So this was 1993. This is pre-construction 1998 versus after the state of Maryland and the Army Corps of Engineers created a project like Hart-Miller Island where they pumped in dredge material and regained the footprint from the original island. Now, these little remnants here, that was Poplar Island, all that was left. And here you have Jefferson Island and what will become Queen Anne's Island, just about breaking off there. And Coach's is still in good shape down here. But you can see how it changed from that till 2011 over here, where they rebuilt Poplar Island. And here's, again, Jefferson, and here's Coach's down here. So they created wonderful habitat for waterfowl, shorebirds, terns, egrets. And then this is where it is now. I should say, going back one, the way this was set up here in 2011, that's the way the island was basically when I did my bee survey in 2015. And then I threw this slide in 2021, even though it's after my study, because all this area had now been created. And that made then 1,715 acres. And if you wondered what happened to Jefferson here and Queen Anne Island, well, they're privately owned and they were just sold in December 2021 for $1,740,000. And this was where the lodge was here, right in here. So that is privately owned. It's now valued over $2 million for the island. So you still have to worry about erosion, but now that Poplar Island's been built, it's much more protected. So with that, I will now get into my project. So flora. I didn't do a floral survey on the island, but I did a literature search. I found 6 different reports, 2 from Jan Reese, 1 from Maryland Environmental Service, 1 from Fish and Wildlife Service, and 2 from the Army Corps. And each one had different subjects that they dealt with. Some were wetland plants, some were pioneering species, some were invasive species. So I collated all of that together. And it came up with 47 families of vegetation, 125 genera, and 166 species. And at least 59% of these are insect pollinated and would be available for bee foraging. So the methods: 3 principal investigators, me primarily for the bee stuff, And I was an associate at Sam Drovy's USGS Native Bee Inventory and Monitoring Lab, which now is called the Native Bee Lab. And then Pete McGowan and Robbie Callahan, who were with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at their Chesapeake Bay Ecological Services field office in Annapolis. And this really was helpful, having the two of them, because a lot of the field work was done by them. And then I took it from there after we got everything set up on the island. So in 2009, I did a year-long bee survey on Hart-Miller Island. See that, Fred? That's Hart-Miller Island. And then 2015, farther down the bay here at Poplar Island. These are both dredge material containment facilities that were created from this dredge material from the shipping channels in the bay and to the approaches to Baltimore Harbor. And the way we did it here on this island, we used these continuously trapping propylene glycol cup traps, and I'll discuss them in another slide coming up. But there were 5 sites, various habitats that were set up. We had one down here that was on sandy area. This one was just phenomenal for the number of bees that were captured. We started off here, and since this was an active construction site, a lot of these transects that I had set up had to be moved throughout the 2015, just for that reason. But this was wonderful, the numbers of bees that were collected there. And then up here, this was kind of some vegetation with some flowering plants, and then the roadside here of this cell and the roadside here of this cell. So for these transects, we put out 9 cups, and they were each 12 ounces, and they were painted either fluorescent blue, fluorescent yellow, or left unpainted. And when you set out the 9-cup transect, you alternated the colors, yellow, blue, white, yellow, blue, white, filled them with a 50-50 solution, propylene glycol and water, and then you add a little bit of Ultra Dawn to lower the surface tension of the water so that bees would land and be captured. So these were put out, left out for 2 weeks at a time, and then Robbie and Pete would go and check them, empty them out, and then redeploy every 2 weeks. And then once we had the specimens, well, like I said, I had to move these a few times because of the active construction that was going on out there. So they had to move throughout the study. But then after that, when they were collected by Pete and Robbie, then I collected the specimens from them at their office and brought them to the Native Bee Lab in Laurel. And at the time we were in Laurel, we were in Greenbelt at the time, not Greenbelt, Green. Why is my mind going? But anyway, the other green. And then once we had everything at the lab, then the specimens had to be washed, dried, pinned, identified, databased, and then the database checked. And then some of the specimens were photographed. So it was a cooperative effort with me, Sam Drogy, and all the technicians and the interns in the lab. And the results, we're getting to bees now. There's 6 bee families in North America. And you can see that the one that captured the most was the sweat bees, the Halictidae. 35 species were collected on the island, and the numbers, 18,000 specimens on these continuously trapping. Once you started trapping in April, you trapped until the end of the year, which would have been the early December. So, and most of these were all one species, it turned out. And then the second most number were the Apidae down here at the bottom, and 306 individuals, but 29 different species. And then followed by the mining bees, and there were 14 species there. And we'll get into these. This shows the seasonal abundance. You can see where the majority of the bees were captured in the springtime. There was a late summer, early fall pulse in here, but the majority definitely springtime. And I should mention that bee species, some are only out in the spring, some are only out in the summer, some are only out in the fall, and some can be out all the seasons. It just depends on the species. So, went backwards there. All right, one more. Rank abundance curve. This shows each of the 94 species, how many specimens there were for each species. And you can see, other than the 4 that are here, 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 and here, the other 90, very few numbers were captured. And in many cases, it was just singletons, just single specimens of all of those. And then comparing the 2 islands, because that's what I was interested in, to see how the 2 islands compared, even though the protocol was different used between the 2 islands. For Hart-Miller, we had 34 species only on Hart-Miller. Both islands, 52 species, and Poplar Island, 42 species. And a lot of these ones on Poplar Island are more coastal, things that you would find on the lower eastern shore. Whereas Hart-Miller, you're starting to get some of the stuff from the Piedmont showing up there. So we had 3 first Maryland records. This one's an interesting one. It's Sphecodes near Cressonii. We got 14 female specimens, and I sent them to Mike Arduzer out in Missouri. He's the specialist on Sphecodes. And this is potentially a new undescribed species. And I'm hoping at some point, I know Mike's plate is so full, but hopefully at some point he will officially describe this. It's closest to Sphecodes cressonii, but the pronotum, which is the area kind of right in here and kind of right in here, it has spines on it dorsolaterally. And that's not the case with cressonii. So it potentially probably going to need some DNA work, but potentially a new species. Then Nemata origeronus is, this is a Western species. And this is our first record out here in Maryland, but much more common out west. Then Triepulus rhododontus, or red tooth, you can just kind of see the mandibles here that are red. We got 1 female specimen. These do occur around Maryland and surrounding states, but this was the first one that's ever been found in Maryland. And one noteworthy record. This Lasioglossum semiceruleum only captured 1 female, and this is kind of a gummed up specimen, but these are, it is a type of sweat bee. They're kind of bluish in color, widely distributed west of the Mississippi River, and only 6 known records at this point east of the Mississippi, 3 in Wisconsin, which borders the Mississippi River, and then our 3 in Maryland, which is weird. 2004, 1 was found in Bowie, 2007 in Whitman, which is right across the mainland, on the mainland from Poplar Island, and then Poplar Island in 2015. And this shows the North American distribution. And you can see the regular distribution here. And then you got Maryland right here. So then you wonder, how did they get to Maryland? Well, and this shows the spots here. The Bowie one here, this is Poplar Island, and this is Whitman. They were fairly close to each other, but spatially close, but not temporally close. So could adults have flown here? It's probably unlikely. Were they blown by the weather? Again, probably unlikely. Most likely these were human-mediated transport. And where that happens, if horticultural specimens are sent to big box stores or anything here on the East Coast, they can have overwintering adult females in the soil or entire nests in the soil. And that is most likely how they got here. But now, is there a small population still present? It's hard to say. It could possibly be answered by more, intensive sampling in the Whitman Poplar Island area. But remember, with all this sampling that's been done, especially on Poplar Island, there was one specimen out of 18,000 something. So the odds of catching more of these is very slim if there is a small population present in Maryland. Non-native species, captured 5. Whoops, go back there. The slender-faced masked bee, Hylaeus leptocephalus. This was an accidental that was discovered in North America in 1912 in Fargo, North Dakota, and has spread since it was found. Another accidental one this came from Africa, and this is either Megachile concinna or Megachile pusilla. They are very similar, and you really need DNA to be 100% positive as to which species you have. But these showed up in the West Indies in the early 1800s and then in the US after World War II. Then the hornface bee, Osmia cornifrons. These were intentionally introduced in the US, and these were introduced at USDA at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. And this is for pollination of stone fruits. So anything like plums and peaches, things like that, apples you could include, but mostly the stone fruits. And these have spread, not as much as this other one next to it, the Taurus mason bee, Osmia taurus, which we don't know how it got here, accidental, from Eastern China and Japan. And these are spreading all over the Eastern US right now. Their numbers have been increasing. And you can see I got 1 Osmia cornifrons and 141 Osmia taurus out on the island. And there is some concern that these Taurus mason bees may be driving down the populations of the other Osmia species because of competition. And then the last non-native species, the honeybee, which was introduced from Europe by the colonists in the 1620s in Virginia. Only 1 specimen did I get on the island. And they're not that attracted to bowls anyway. And I should mention the sweat bees that I captured so many of, they are attracted, very attracted to bowl traps. So it's skewed towards the sweat bees. Then I got 12 Cleptoparasitic species. And you may say, well, what is that? All right, if you're familiar with cowbirds, they are like the old world cuckoos. They will lay their nest, the female over here. She hangs out around a nest of a potential host, such as a cardinal or a warbler or something like that. And then she'll lay her egg in that nest when the female is not on the nest. Then what happens, her egg will hatch. The other eggs may hatch as well, but the cowbird grows much faster, it's much bigger, and it will get all the food, and it may toss out, eject the other nestlings from the nest. But that's the way they work. So the kleptoparasitic bees are also known as cuckoo bees for this reason. And they do something similar. Mostly the adult females, they'll go into the nest, lay an egg in the host's nest, and then leave. And then the larva that hatches from this kleptoparasitic bee, it feeds on the food that had been provided for the host, and thereby it starves it, or it actively kills the host egg or larva. And in particular, this is the nomada cuckoo bees that do this. And then some adult females of these cuckoo bees, they'll destroy the egg of the host and then replace it with their own. Little sip. And that's the lazy glossum, the Dialectus subgenus, and the Spicotes do that, where they actually destroy the egg. So these 12 species, and you have to forgive me, I've been breathing in paint fumes for 9 days here. Little throat lozenge. Okay. One lazy glossum platyparium, which is a cuckoo that it lays its eggs in the nests of other lazy glossum Dialectus species. Then we have Spicotes. We have the first Maryland record again, Cresonii here, and then Illinoensis over here. And Spicotes can be difficult to tell apart. And like I said, Mike Arduzer is the expert right now on these. He's the world expert. Then lots of nomata. Bethunii to the left, denticulata in the middle, and then Erigeronus on the right. And nomatas, a lot of them can look very similar. And they don't know the hosts for a lot of these, but for denticulata, this would be other mining bee species, is that they'll use their nest as the host nest. Then 3 more nomata, Illinoensis or Sayi, which again, you need DNA to separate them, Imbricata in the middle, and then Pygmaea over here. And again, their host species are Andrinus, the mining bees. And then the last 3, nomata, the bidentate group, which are difficult to separate. Bidentate means they have 2 teeth on each mandible. And then Triepulus, the 2 specimens. And one was that first Maryland specimen, Rhododontus. And it's interesting, I don't know how significant it is, but these 3 first Maryland records were all cuckoo bees. Then the oligolectic species, these are the specialist bees that specialize on one particular type of plant. We had 3 of the mining bees, all 3 Andrina. Arabis here, Araginii here, and then Nida here. The first one, Arabis, specifically, they are oligolectic. They go for rock cress and bitter cress, spring beauties for Origine, and then Nida on willows. And none of these plants have been documented. They're probably on the island, but no one's out there doing floral surveys. So they're probably there since the bees are there. And then there was one sweat bee. This was Lasiglossum lustrans, and it's a specialist on desert chicory, which is it's suspected of occurring again, but not positively documented on the island. Then these, definitely the plants are on the island. This is Habropoda laboriosa, which is also known as blueberry bee. And they are specifically on blueberries, is what they nectar on. And low bush blueberry and high bush blueberry are both out on the island. Then these are 3 species here of Melisodes, Boltonii, Dentiventris, and Druriellus. And they're on members of the sunflower family, the Asteraceae, which is tons of Asteraceae on the islands. And then with the Apidae, we have 7 species, 2, well, I'm sorry, yeah, let me jump back. 3 Melisodes there, 2 more Melisodes now, Suballatus here, and Trinotus here. Again, the sunflower family Asteraceae, which is plentiful on the island. And then this is one of my favorite bees, Tilithrix bombiformis. These come out late July, early August, and specifically when the mallows are out, any of the marsh mallows, specifically rose mallow. And they are tons of them when they come. They're ground nesters, and you can have tons of them if you have any of these marsh hibiscus type plants out there. And crimson-eyed rose mallow is on the island, and then two other mallows, the velvet leaf and Virginia salt marsh mallow, are also out there. But they look like bumblebees with very long legs and very long claws. So then to summarize, with Poplar Island and Hart-Miller Island, with the two bee surveys, this dredge material has loose sandy soils and the vegetation that grows on it. And it seems to provide superb nesting habitat and foraging habitat for these ground nesting native bees. So there's two other projects. One has started, one will be starting, James Island and Barron Island, where they're rebuilding the islands with dredge material. And I suspect if anyone does native bee surveys, and it won't be me because that's going to be too far down the road, both Dorchester County, southern Dorchester County, that's too far away, but it's going to be many years before the habitat is created that the bees will colonize. But I suspect that once those projects are completed, you're also going to find beneficial nesting and foraging habitat, and the bees will colonize. So if anybody is interested in the history of Poplar Islands, 3 books I'd recommend. Poplar Island, My Memories as a Boy. That's a fantastic read. You can read it in one sitting. That Peter K. Bailey, who is still alive, and his sister is still alive. The Disappearing Islands of the Chesapeake, that deals with all the disappearing islands that have eroded away, by William B. Cronin. And then Chesapeake Run Runners of the Roaring Twenties, that deals with all, not just Poplar Island, but all the rum running that was done in the 20s. So my acknowledgements. This couldn't have been done without Pete McGowan and Robbie Callahan. By them doing the field work, that simplified matters than me having to try and get out to the island all the time. So that worked out perfectly, and they were on the island at least weekly and sometimes several days a week. So they could check the traps, and then when they emptied them, get the specimens to me, I could pick them up, take them to the bee lab, and then that's where Sam Droege, he and I kind of set up the project. He identified the majority of these specimens because there were just so many to do. And then he did the photography, some of this beautiful photography that you've seen. And then he also did manuscript review, as did Jonathan Maudsley from USGS. He reviewed the manuscript. And I should say, this was published in the Maryland Entomologist. And I also have a paper that was published in Insecta Mundi. And that's about that lazy glossum semi-cerulean specimen that normally is out west, and we have the 3 Maryland specimens. So 2 journal articles have come out of this study. And then also got the techs and the interns. This couldn't all been done with all of the grunt work they did, washing and drying and pinning, and that was just tedious work. And then Mike Garduzer for identifying the sphecodes, Jason Gibbs up in University of Manitoba for identifying some of the lazy glossum, and then Jan Reese and Ryland Taylor, they supplied some of the plant species lists. And with that, I think we're over, and I will stop sharing. And we're back. So Fred, are you there?
I am right here.
Okay.
Awesome presentation, Gene. Thank you so much. That was really good. And please, folks, anybody has any questions, you can either type them in the chat or you can unmute and ask directly to Gene. So,
You can blame Fred for the history because we did a trial run the other night, not through the whole talk, but just to try and get on to make sure everything would work out all right. And I just had a few little things in there about history. And he was asking me so many questions about, well, what happened then? Well, how did they do this? Well, how come that became that? So I thought, okay, I'll add in the stuff. So that's how the history section ended up getting in there.
I think that was really good, though. The history, I particularly enjoyed that, hearing all those things about it. I'm impressed that you got those pictures, the historical pictures. They're really nice. And just hearing about it, I like history a lot. And the colonial information, couldn't imagine this guy, what was his name, Chamberlain, or he came and found his wife and kids slaughtered. And
oh, that was yeah, Hawkins. Hawkins?
No,
it was Claiborne's cousin.
yeah, the guy that got it from him. And,
Yeah.
couldn't imagine what in the 1600s. I guess that's those sort of things. The Indians were still around, and those kind of things did happen.
Maryland was not a European friendly state.
No.
Our area, Maryland was not friendly for Europeans. They kept fighting until after the Revolutionary War, and they were literally extincted. Maryland Indians.
So I'm glad you included that, and I'm sure everybody else liked it too. And
Yeah, the more details I found, the more fascinating I found it.
really is, and I like the way you showed the progression of the erosion, and then what was finally left, these little specks of what it used to be, just specks, and now of course they filled it in and made it better. So
well, I hope these rare bees can make it somewhere or move to someplace else.
they'll, yeah.
Yeah, so at this point, as you saw, Jefferson Island and Queen Anne's Island, they're both privately owned by one owner, and Coach's Island is also owned, privately owned. But then Poplar is this big project with the Army Corps and Maryland.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Oh,
Port Administration.
anybody want to ask any questions? Please feel free to unmute and ask.
Hey, Gene,
Yes.
two things. Number one, I really enjoy your genuine Maryland accent.
Okay.
Number two, I really enjoyed that history. Living around here, I've lived here all my life as well. Who knew that the presidents and politicians went to this island to have their fun and games?
I know.
That's amazing. Really cool. Love it.
Absolutely.
Believe it. I couldn't believe it.
And the three people that were doing it were from Arkansas, Nevada, and whatever the third one was that I'm forgetting, Missouri.
Missouri, I think. Yeah.
All red states.
Ah,
I have a question.
mhm,
Back in the 1960s, I went to Anne Arundel Community College.
Okay.
One day during a break between classes, somebody who lived in Annapolis and I went to Sandy Point, and he said that from the base of the Bay Bridge, you could actually see Poplar Island way down on the other side of the bay. You think that's possible?
Yes, I seem to remember when I was on Poplar Island, you could see the Bay Bridge if it was a clear day.
Wow.
That's my recollection. Marcia's shaking her head, yes.
Yes. Mhm. But it
Interesting.
has to be a really clear day. Usually
gotta
there's
be
too much
real clear.
haze.
Yeah, the same with Hart-Miller Island. On a really clear day, you'd see the Bay Bridge down there.
Yeah, well, I feel the same as George. I love the B section of your talk, but if you had quit right after the history, I would have been absolutely totally satisfied. That was brilliant and fascinating, and it disproved something that I had heard for years, which was that increased large ship traffic through the Chesapeake is what eroded Poplar Island. And it looks like it preceded the advent of these huge cargo ships by a century or so.
Yeah, yeah,
Started to break up.
it started. Yeah, just, and I hadn't thought about the large cargo ships, but I'm sure once they started, that really accelerated things a lot more. So I dazzled everybody, I guess. Either that or they're asleep.
Not at all.
Oh, loved it, loved it.
Yeah, Gene, I didn't sleep a wink.
Good, Phil.
No, I really appreciated the history that you gave along with it. And it's really something, you know, you see these islands degrading and disappearing, and now they're being restored. And it's nice to know that in addition to the you know, the macrofauna, the birds and what have you, that they're providing new habitat to and protected habitat to,
Mhm.
that there's benefits for the micro fauna as well. I think it's really a wonderful thing that they're doing out there.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I was fascinated that whole black cat project. I just
Well-
read that and I couldn't believe it.
My wife would appreciate that. We've got 2 garbage pail kids at our house, and they're here next to our grandson, of course. They're
Uh-huh.
her favorite babies.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you
I see
again.
I see a hand up for Rachel Smith.
Hi, thank you so much for welcoming us to the meeting tonight.
Sure.
We're here at UMBC in the
Mhm.
Biological Sciences building. We were just hoping to catch the meeting. I think I have my children here with me. This is Sebastian and this is Henry. They're both twins and they're both five years old. They're very happy to be here. Henry has a question. What you want to ask your question?
How bees sting and how they get like a stinger?
So you mean the cuckoo bees, right? Whether or not they sting and if they sting, how they sting.
Yeah, and how they get stingers,
Mhm.
like the pointy thing on their butt.
Well, let me mention stings first. Only female bees can sting. Males bees cannot sting. They do not have a stinger. Most of these really small bees, their stinger is so small, it can't sting you because it's so small, it can't even get through your skin. But if they're going to kill, you know, another host species inside the nest, they could use the stinger, or they could just use the mandibles and kill it, you know, their jaws, and they could just kill the species that way. But, you know, they could use it, I guess, probably more likely instead of stinging the host that's in there, the little larvae or the egg, they probably just destroy it with their mandibles, with their jaws. They just kind of chew it apart. So go ahead, hit me with another one.
Thank you.
You guys are muted. There we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I give a shout out to them too, because they were trying to log in, didn't have the actual Zoom link. They were using the website, and I was emailing back and forth while you were talking, trying to get them to figure it out. They had actually ducked out the door and went over to UMBC, and then they finally got the link up, and here they are. So
Good.
thanks for hanging in there, you guys. Did you see my other email? We have recorded the session. It'll be posted on YouTube in a little while, so you can play it back. And Gene had some very nice historical pictures and history of the island, as well as maps that show how it used to look.